It's a strange thing, the digital ghosts we leave behind. Email accounts that sit dormant, social media profiles that become silent memorials, and phone numbers that float in the void for a while before being reassigned to someone else. A stranger who has no idea their new number once belonged to your brother. A stranger who has no idea that when your phone buzzes late at night and you see his name on the screen, a name you haven't been able to bring yourself to delete, your heart doesn't just stop, it shatters all over again. That's what I told myself the first time it happened. It was almost 2 in the morning. The only light in my small house was the cold, white glow of my dual monitors, and the only sound was the soft hum of the computers and the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets outside. I was working, of course. As a freelance graphic designer, my hours are my own, which is a polite way of saying they are endless. I was deep in the zone, tweaking the kerning on a logo for a client who probably wouldn't even notice, when my phone, lying face down on the desk, gave a short, sharp buzz. I ignored it. It was probably just a low battery warning or a news alert about something I didn't have the energy to care about. But a few seconds later, it buzzed again. With a sigh, I picked it up, my thumb swiping across the dark screen. The notification was from my messaging app, and the name at the top of the screen was Michael. For a solid 10 seconds, I just stared. My brain refused to process the information. It was like looking at a sentence written in a language I used to know but had long since forgotten. Michael, my brother. My brother who had died 14 months ago, his car wrapped around an ancient oak tree on a slick, rain-swept highway. My fingers felt numb as I opened the message. It was one word. Hey. I read it over and over. Hey, just that. Simple, casual. A word Michael had texted me 1,000 times before. A cold dread, thick and heavy like mud, began to fill my chest. I could feel my own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked drumming against my ribs. I looked around my office at the familiar shadows in the corners, the stack of design books, the framed photo on my desk of me and Michael as kids, grinning with missing teeth. Everything was the same, but the air felt suddenly thin, charged with an impossible energy. My first thought, the rational one that fought its way through the fog of shock, was that the phone company had recycled his number. It had been over a year. Of course they had. Some teenager probably had it now and was texting a friend, a simple typo in the contact number. It was the only explanation. It had to be. With a trembling hand, I typed back, "Who is this?" I hit send. The little blue bubble popped up on my screen and underneath it the word delivered. I waited. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning, watching the blinking cursor in the empty text box, waiting for the 3 little dots to appear, indicating the other person was typing. Nothing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The crickets outside seemed to get louder, their chirping turning into a mocking, incessant drill. Finally, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I pressed the call button next to his name. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, a wave of nausea washing over me. The last time I had called this number, a grim-faced police officer had answered. I pushed the memory away and pressed the button. It didn't even ring. There was a click, a brief moment of static, and then a cold, automated voice filled my ear. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." I hung up. I stared at the phone, then at the message. "Hey," delivered, but the number was not in service. The two facts couldn't coexist. It was a contradiction, a glitch in the fabric of reality. I tried calling again. Same result. Not in service. I put the phone back down on the desk, face down, as if it were something dangerous, something radioactive. I tried to go back to work to focus on the logo, on the precise curvature of the letters. But I couldn't. The single word echoed in my mind. Hey. It was a ghost in the machine. A digital whisper from a place I couldn't call back. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat at my desk, watching the sun come up, feeling a profound and unshakable sense of wrongness settle over my life. My house is on the outskirts of Oak Haven, a small town nestled in the damp, evergreen embrace of the Pacific Northwest. It's not a cabin in the woods, not that cliché. It's a modest two-story rental at the end of a long gravel driveway, bordered on three sides by a thick forest of Douglas fir and cedar. My nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile down the road. It was perfect for me. The quiet, the isolation, it was supposed to be conducive to creativity. I'd lived here for 2 years, and for the most part it had been peaceful. The house was all built in the 70s, and it came with its own language of sounds. The groan of the pipes when the heat kicked on, the creak of the floorboards in the upstairs hallway as the house settled at night, the way the wind would sometimes whistle through a loose seal in the living room window. I knew these sounds. They were the familiar soundtrack to my solitude. After Michael died, the silence became heavier. He used to be the one I'd call during my late-night work sessions, just to have another voice in the house to break up the monotony. We'd talk about nothing, stupid movies, client troubles, his endless complaints about his job as an accountant. He was the anchor of our family, the steady, reliable one. I was the creative, the drifter. We were different, but we were close. His absence was a physical presence in the house, a void that sat in the passenger seat of my car, an empty chair at my small kitchen table. I kept his number in my phone because deleting it felt like a final, unbearable act of letting go. It was a digital gravestone I could carry in my pocket. A week went by after that first message. I tried to forget about it, to bury it under a mountain of work and rationalizations. It was a network error, a server glitch, a crossed wire somewhere deep in the guts of the cellular infrastructure. Plausible explanations were my shield against the creeping dread. Life returned to its normal rhythm. I'd wake up around 9, make a pot of coffee so strong it could dissolve a spoon, and sit at my desk until my eyes burned and my back ached. I'd eat leftovers standing over the sink for lunch, take a walk down the gravel driveway in the late afternoon to feel the cool, damp air on my skin, and then get back to work until the early hours of the morning. It was a lonely existence, but it was mine. Then the second message came. It was a Tuesday night, raining hard. The sound of it drumming on the roof and sluicing through the gutters was a constant, soothing white noise. I was on a video call with a client in New York trying to explain why their idea of using 7 different fonts on a single web page was a bad one. My phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it. Michael. My blood ran cold. I fumbled for the mouse, my hand shaking slightly. "You know what?" I said to the client, my voice strained. Let me just mock that up for you. I think seeing it visually will help. I'll have it over to you in the morning." I ended the call before she could protest, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up the phone. The message was longer this time. "Remember the fort." I dropped the phone on my desk as if it had burned me. I stood up and paced the small office, my hands tangled in my hair. The fort. It wasn't a famous landmark. It wasn't something a stranger could guess. It was 2 pine trees that had fallen against each other in a storm in the woods behind our childhood home. Michael, who was 10 at the time, and I at 7, had spent an entire summer weaving branches and tarps into the wreckage, creating our own secret headquarters. We called it the fort. It was our place. No one else knew about it. Our parents barely knew. It was a memory so specific, so deeply buried, it felt like a violation for it to appear on my screen, transmitted from a dead number. The rationalization started to crumble. This wasn't a wrong number. This wasn't a random glitch. I texted back, my fingers clumsy and stiff. "This isn't funny. Who is this? How do you know about that?" I waited. The rain beat against the window pane. The progress bar on a file I was exporting seemed to freeze. Nothing. No reply. I tried to call the number again. "The number you have dialed is not in service." The house no longer felt peaceful. The familiar sounds began to change their meaning. The groan of the pipes was no longer just the heat. It was a low moan from within the walls. The creak of the floorboards upstairs wasn't the house settling. It was a footstep. The whistle of the wind wasn't just a draft. It was a voice, just on the edge of hearing. I started leaving lights on, playing music constantly, anything to fill the silence, to drown out the new, menacing language the house was speaking. The incidents began to escalate slowly, methodically over the next few weeks. The messages from Michael's number became a form of psychological torture. They were never threatening, never overtly malicious. That would have been easier to deal with. Instead, they were intimate. Still hate cilantro, one read, arriving while I was staring at a takeout menu debating what to order for dinner. I do hate cilantro. Michael always teased me about it. Another time, a photo appeared. It was an old one, blurry and overexposed, of a fishing trip we took with our dad. I was in the foreground, proudly holding up a tiny sunfish, and Michael was behind me, laughing so hard his eyes were squeezed shut. I hadn't seen that photo in at least 50 years. I had no idea where the original even was. It certainly wasn't stored on any cloud I had access to. Yet here it was, sent from his number. My life began to shrink. The fear was a constant, low-grade fever that I couldn't shake. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour or two at a time. I jolt awake in the dark, my heart racing, certain I had heard a noise, certain my phone had buzzed on the nightstand, but it was always silent. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, dulling my senses, making the world feel distant and unreal. My work suffered. I missed deadlines. I sent clients rambling, incoherent emails. I couldn't focus. My mind was a hamster wheel of terror and confusion. Who could be doing this? A hacker? A stalker who had somehow gained access to Michael's old phone or cloud account? It was possible, I supposed. But the level of dedication, the sheer cruelty of it, was unthinkable. And how could they be sending messages from a number that wasn't in service? I spent hours, entire days, lost in internet rabbit holes, reading about spoofing, technologies, and cellular network protocols. I found articles about people being harassed, but nothing quite like this. Nothing that felt so personal, so spectral. Then the non-digital events began. It started with sounds. I was in the kitchen one afternoon making coffee when I heard it. Footsteps, upstairs, directly above me, pacing back and forth in the spare bedroom. It was a heavy, deliberate tread, the exact way Michael used to walk, a slight drag in his left foot from an old high school sports injury. I froze, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. My entire body went rigid. I was the only one home. I hadn't had a visitor in months. The pacing continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. I grabbed the heaviest knife from the block on the counter and crept up the stairs, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my eardrums. I flung open the door to the spare room. Nothing. Just an empty room with a layer of dust on the old desk and a bed neatly made. The air was still and cold. I checked every room, every closet, the attic. The house was empty. I told myself it was the pipes, the house settling, my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me. But I didn't believe it. I knew what I had heard. A few days later, I was working late when my music, a mellow ambient playlist, suddenly cut out. It was replaced by a song I hadn't heard in years, Island in the Sun by Weezer. It was the first song Michael had learned to play on guitar. He'd played it so often that summer that our parents had threatened to hide the instrument. It played for about a minute, the volume slowly increasing before my playlist abruptly resumed. I checked my computer. My music app showed no record of the song having been played. There was no pop-up, no ad. It was as if the sound had just materialized in the room. My grip on reality was slipping. I felt like I was being haunted, not by a ghost in a white sheet, but by data, by memories, by sounds. The line between my grief and the strange occurrences was blurring until I couldn't tell them apart. Was I having a breakdown? Was the stress and the unresolved sorrow of my brother's death finally manifesting as a full-blown psychosis? I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger. A pale, gaunt man with dark circles under his wild, terrified eyes. I started talking to myself, whispering reassurances in the empty house. "You're just tired, Alex. You're not sleeping. It's not real." But the feeling, the cold, prickling certainty that I was not alone, never went away. It was a constant presence at my back, a weight in the air. I began to feel watched. When I sat at my desk, I had the unshakable sensation of someone standing in the doorway behind me. I'd whip my head around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was never anyone there. I saw things in my peripheral vision. A tall, dark shape moving past the window, a flicker of movement in the reflection of my dark monitor screen. It was always gone by the time I focused on it, leaving me questioning my own senses. The paranoia became a prison. I covered the camera on my laptop. I put my phone in a drawer in another room when I worked, but I couldn't escape it. The feeling was inside the house with me. The house itself felt complicit, its creaks and groans now sounding like a language of warning. I was a ghost in my own home, a nervous, trembling wreck waiting for the next text, the next sound, the next crack in my sanity. I wanted to tell someone, to scream for help, but what would I say? My dead brother is texting me and I think his ghost is playing Weezer in my office. They would have me committed. I was completely, utterly alone, trapped in a slow, quiet, unraveling nightmare. The storm was predicted for days. The news channels called it the worst front to hit the region in a decade. I didn't care. I barely registered the world outside my windows anymore. My world had become the interior of my house and the terrifying landscape of my own mind. When the wind started to pick up that Friday evening, rattling the windows in their frames, it was just more noise to add to the chorus. By 10 o'clock, it was a full-blown gale. The rain was coming down in solid, horizontal sheets, and the wind howled like something ancient and predatory. The lights flickered once, twice, and then with a final, apologetic buzz, they died. The hum of my computers, the music I had playing, my entire wall of manufactured noise, all of it vanished. I was plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness and an even more shocking silence. All that remained was the elemental roar of the storm outside. My breath hitched in my chest. I fumbled on my desk for my phone, my only connection, my only source of light. My fingers closed around its smooth, cold case. I turned on the flashlight, its narrow, bright beam cutting a pathetic swathe through the oppressive blackness of my office. It illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, the familiar shapes of my desk and chair looking alien and threatening in the stark light. The battery was at 18%. I sat there for what felt like hours, frozen in my chair, just listening to the storm. The house groaned and protested under the assault of the wind. A tree branch scraped against the side of the house, a sound like long fingernails dragging down a chalkboard. I tried to control my breathing, to tell myself this was normal. Storms happen, power goes out. But my body was rigid with a primal fear. The darkness felt absolute, the isolation complete. And then my phone buzzed in my hand. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second. A message notification from Michael. My blood turned to ice water. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone steady. With a sickening sense of inevitability, I opened it. It wasn't text this time. It was a picture, dark, grainy, taken with no flash. It took my brain a few seconds to resolve the image, to understand what I was looking at. It was a photo of my office window taken from outside, from out in the storm. The rain had smeared the glass, distorting the view, but through the rivulets of water I could see inside. I could see the faint glow of a phone screen, and I could see a dark, hunched silhouette, my silhouette, hunched over my phone, right now. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, strangled gasp. The photo had been taken just seconds ago. Whoever, whatever sent it was outside, right now, watching me. Before I could even process the horror of that, a new message popped up beneath the image. I'm home. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my lungs, a solid block of ice. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor, its beam of light now pointing crazily at the ceiling. I scrambled back, my chair tipping over and crashing to the floor. I was on my hands and knees in the dark, my mind a blank wall of pure animal terror. Home, he was home. My senses were screaming. Every nerve ending was on fire. And then I heard it. Over the howling of the wind, a new sound. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Footsteps on the wooden porch out front. Slow, deliberate. The sound of heavy work boots, water squelching with each step. It was the sound of Michael's tread. I knew it as well as I knew my own heartbeat. Squish thump, coming closer. I scrambled out of the office and into the hallway, my bare feet slipping on the hardwood floor. I had to hide. My mind was racing, trying to find a safe place in a house that no longer felt safe, that had never been safe. The closet under the stairs. It was small, cramped, filled with old coats and boxes. I fumbled for the knob, pulled the door open, and squeezed myself inside, pulling it shut behind me. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the rough drywall, my knees drawn up to my chest. I tried to silence my own ragged, panicked breathing, pressing a hand over my mouth. In the suffocating darkness of the closet, sound was everything. I heard the footsteps stop right in front of the door. I heard the faint jingle of what sounded like keys, and then the unmistakable metallic sound of the front doorknob turning, slowly, without any force, not a break-in, an entry, as if the person had a key, as if they belonged here. A click, the door opened. A gust of wind and rain swept into the house, and then the heavy front door thudded shut, sealing the sound of the storm outside, and sealing me inside with it. Silence, a profound, terrifying silence that was worse than the storm. And then the footsteps started again. Inside the house. Squish thump. Water dripping onto the hardwood floor of the entryway. Squish thump. Moving slowly through the living room just on the other side of the thin closet door. I could hear the faint rustle of a wet jacket. I could smell the damp, earthy scent of rain and wet leaves. My entire world had shrunk to the space of this dark, cramped close. I held my breath until my lungs burned, my eyes squeezed shut, praying it would go away, that I would wake up, that this was all some horrible, stress-induced nightmare. The footsteps stopped, right outside the closet door. I could feel a presence there, a weight in the air just inches from me. I imagined a hand reaching for the doorknob. Time seemed to stop. Every second stretched into a painful, unbearable eternity. My heart was going to explode. I was going to die in this closet, choking on my own fear. I waited for the knob to turn, for the door to swing open, for the end. But it never came. There was only the sound, a soft, quiet exhale like a sigh of contentment on the other side of the door. And then nothing. The silence returned, deeper and more absolute than before. A heavy, listening silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I stayed there, cramped and shaking in the dark, for the rest of the night, listening to a silence that was louder than any scream. The first hint of dawn was a pale, gray line under the closet door. The storm had passed. The only sound was the steady drip, drip, drip of water from the eaves. I don't know how long I sat there after the silence began, hours maybe. My body was a knot of petrified muscle, my joints screaming in protest. My mind felt scoured, empty. Eventually, driven by a thirst so intense it was painful, I forced my trembling hand to reach for the doorknob. It felt impossibly heavy. I turned it with an agonizingly slow creak and pushed the door open. The house was still. Bathed in the weak gray light of morning, it looked normal. Nothing was out of place. The living room was tidy, the front door was shut and locked, bolted from the inside, exactly as I had left it. I crept through the house like a burglar in my own home, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. The kitchen was empty. I checked the back door, it was locked and bolted too. I went upstairs, my whole body tense, expecting to find something, someone. But the rooms were empty, just as they always were. There was no sign of a break-in, no wet footprints on the hardwood floor, no damp jacket slung over a chair, nothing. It was as if the entire night, the footsteps, the door opening, the presence outside the closet, none of it had happened. My phone. I had forgotten about my phone. I ran back to my office. The chair was still overturned, and there on the floor was my phone, screen dark, the battery dead, the proof, the picture, the final message. I grabbed the charger, my hands shaking as I plugged it in and connected the phone. I waited, watching the screen, my breath held. The battery symbol appeared, then the screen lit up with the manufacturer's logo. It took an eternity to boot up. Finally, the home screen appeared. I swiped it open, my thumb immediately going to my messaging app. I scrolled to Michael's name, my heart hammering. I tapped on it. The conversation thread opened, and it was empty. No, not just the messages from the past few weeks. Everything. Years of conversations, jokes, arguments, photos, memories, all of it. Gone. The entire history I had with my brother on this phone had been wiped clean as if it had never existed. The only thing left was his name, Michael, at the top of a blank screen. I sank to my knees. It was the final, cruelest twist, the complete erasure of evidence. Now there was no proof, not a single shred. It was my word against my own sanity. And in that moment I knew with a chilling certainty that I had lost. There was no one I could tell, no one who would ever believe me. The experience had been perfectly, diabolically crafted to isolate and destroy me, leaving no trace behind except for the wreckage in my mind. Was it a ghost? A meticulously cruel stalker? Or had my own grief created a phantom so powerful it could manipulate my world and my mind? I would never know. And that was the true horror, the not knowing. I sold the house. I took the first offer, a ridiculously low one just to be free of it. I packed 2 suitcases and left everything else behind, a life I could no longer stand to look at. I moved to a city, a loud, anonymous, sprawling city where I could be surrounded by the noise of millions of people. I got a tiny apartment on the 14th floor of a high-rise, a place with thin walls where I could hear my neighbors' televisions and arguments, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. I got a new phone, a new number. I never restored my contacts from my old cloud backup. I started over. But you can't start over from something like that. It doesn't leave you. It becomes a part of you, a dark, quiet room in your mind that you have to live with for the rest of your life. I don't sleep in the dark anymore. I have 3 different lamps that stay on all night. I can't handle silence. There's always a TV or a podcast playing even when I sleep. I jump at every unexpected noise, every buzz of my phone. The fear is a chronic illness, a permanent part of my chemistry. Most days I can almost convince myself it was a breakdown, a psychological fissure caused by loss and isolation. It's the sanest explanation, the one that lets me function. But then there are the nights. The nights when the city finally quiets down, when the noise fades to a distant hum. On those nights sometimes, I'll hear a sound from the hallway outside my apartment. A sound that doesn't belong. The sound of a slow, deliberate footstep with a slight drag in the left foot. And I know, with a cold certainty that sinks deep into my bones, that it doesn't matter how far I run or how much noise I surround myself with. I will never, ever be alone again.